Certain and Uncertain, Chapter 34, A Workable Theory. Ethan hated waking up after everything went down. It honestly made him feel like he was impeding the mission. So when he woke up to the bad guy, an ex of Gwen's apparently, screaming and vowing revenge before taking off, it was not how he wanted this to go. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his gun, but the metal-masked man was already gone. Kevin dropped the pieces of the golden device he'd been using. He was back to his mutated form. Ethan blinked. What happened? He rubbed a large goose egg on the back of his head. Kevin shook his head.
I came to my senses.
Gwen smacked him in the shoulder. You made a deal with Michael Morningstar? That was really, really dumb. As Gwen went off on a tirade about the levels of stupidity Kevin had sunk to, first with his run-in with Charmcaster, now actively making a deal with Darkstar, Ethan looked around. Wait. And you didn't even tell me! I could have told you that the Dominus Librium was a dangerous artifact that could have gotten you killed. But no! Don't go to your girlfriend, the magical expert, when an enemy approaches you with a shady deal. Guys, Ethan had to shout to be heard above Gwen, who glared at him. What? Where's Jen? Gwen stopped entirely and looked around as Kevin swore, dropping the pieces of the Dominus Librium he'd been holding. A flash of green saved them from panic, even though it was mostly buried under a pile of prop boxes. They dug her out quickly. That fucking hurt. She groaned as Ethan pulled her out of the last bit of the pile of destroyed boxes. She blinked slightly at Kevin and frowned. What happened?
I made a deal with Michael Morningstar. He let me track him down. I wanted to beat the snot out of him for what he did to Gwen when we first met, for framing us and getting my badge taken away, for ditching us during the last fight with the DN aliens. He knew I'd come. Must have known I'd be stupid enough to come alone.
Kevin looked back over at where the dropped pieces of the Dominus Librium now lay.
He offered, well, a solution. For his busted-up face, for my problem. It's been nearly 2 months. I was desperate. He made sense.
Kevin ran his hands over his face.
I wanted him to not be lying. I wanted there to be an easy solution that you just didn't know about. I wanted a cure.
He looked away from the pieces of the device.
It was stupid.
Jen nodded. Yeah, it was, but I don't blame you. He looked up, shock on his face. I've been stuck as something I'm not before, too. It almost got me dissected by Forever Knights. And that was just the first time I got stuck. It's happened a few times. That's why she ended up not wanting Albeda to be stuck as her, Gwen said, looking Kevin over. There's a better way to do this. We will find it, or I will go sit in Azimuth's lab and sing until he gives in and finds a way to fix you. Kevin laughed. I'll bring my mom's guitar. She taught me how to play after I gave up the Omnitrix the first time. I could do it. Kevin burst out laughing. Gwen shook her head. She's serious. Ken taught her how to sing. Gwen took Kevin's arm. Ethan helped Jen all the way to her feet and helped her out to the car.
We're taking both of you back to medical.
We're taking both of you back to the Met Bay. They need to look you both over. Kevin nodded.
It's probably not a bad idea,
he said as Jen nodded. The doctors could find nothing wrong with them, but decided to keep them both overnight. Jen grumbled, but stayed up late watching those bad alien horror movies with Ethan. There was a pile of popcorn at the base of the TV the next morning, and the doctors giggled to themselves. They'd heard the two argue the ethics of the fake aliens and the scientists in the movies throughout the night, and none of them had the heart to tell them to go to sleep. In a similar case, no one had been brave enough to enter Kevin's room that night after the angry figure of Gwen Tennyson entered. She did not leave either. None of the plumbers wanted to mess with the Tennysons, so they left Kevin to his fate. They did do a lot of talking that night. Kevin apologized several times, and Gwen did eventually forgive him. They spent the night in a similar state to Jen and Ethan, cuddled together, though they chose to watch the Nature Channel. Max looked in on both couples to make sure they were okay and found both pairs asleep. He smiled slightly at the sight of his granddaughters looking peaceful for once. They had been through too much for people their age. It was nice to see them happy. The next day found Gwen in her room, meditating. She was trying to get in contact with her grandmother through the mana field. It took some time, but eventually she made the connection.
Gwen, so good to hear from you. I see your studies are going well.
Gwen smiled.
Pretty well, yeah. I have a question.
Verdona grinned.
I bet I have an answer.
Gwen explained the events of the past day to her grandmother. Verdona raised an eyebrow.
As much as I love a little bit of gossip here and there, Gwen dear, I'm not sure I see your question.
Gwen nodded.
When Kevin and Darkstar used the Dominus Librium, it hurt Kevin and Jen. I cross-referenced the times. It matches perfectly, but I don't know why. Any ideas?
Verdona frowned.
There are a few possibilities. This Darkstar, an energy vampire, you said.
Gwen nodded. Verdona continued.
Has he ever gotten his hands on Jen alone?
Gwen had to think about it for a moment.
It's possible? He had her, Kevin, and a few others at one point.
Verdona frowned.
Is he at all skilled in the mystic arts? Not that I know of, but he seems to be taking an interest if the book we recovered from his lair is any indication.
Verdona frowned.
If he was a skilled magic user, I would say he could have created a loop between them to feed off her energy at a low level, to keep it unnoticed, but he'd have to be highly skilled.
Gwen shook her head.
Definitely not, then.
She tapped her chin.
What if it's not Michael? What if the connection is between Jen and Kevin?
Verdona raised an eyebrow.
From what I learned while in her mind, it's more likely. They've had an energy-based connection since he first took power from the Omnitrix. The most recent accident may have opened an energy connection between the two, or rather, reopened one that likely already existed.
Gwen frowned.
What does that mean, though? Your cousin and your boy toy have a base connection. It may even connect their mana, but it's unlikely either of them are even aware of it. However, there is a danger to a connection like that.
Verdona tapped her chin.
As with the Dominus Librium, any magical threat that affects one may affect the other. Severing a connection like that is tricky and takes time. I will have to get back to you on the details of that. I'll be as quick as I can, dear. You should call me more often, though. I'll talk to you soon.
She got off the connection and Gwen blinked, her eyes open, and frowned.
Well, that wasn't what I was hoping for.
Chapter 35, News Coverage. Jen flicked through the channels on the TV. She was in her living room. Ethan was borrowing her shower again. He'd ended up staying the night at her house. They'd had 4 more bad alien horror movies to get through. Ethan found it very amusing that Jen tended to side with the crashed aliens trying to get off planet. Not the ones that were just making mischief for the sake of chaos. But she tended to side against the scientists in these movies almost exclusively. Most of them remind me of Animo, she said before he'd asked who Animo was, and she'd spent the next hour explaining the adventures she'd gone through, stopping the crazed ex-vet. They'd fallen asleep in each other's arms again. Jen blinked as she saw something familiar flash on the channel and paused in her searching.
2 months later, the world is still reeling from the revelation that aliens exist.
Jen frowned at the presenter on screen. He had brown hair, graying on the sides, and glasses. The scrolling text at the bottom of the screen proclaimed the show The Harangue Nation. The screen by the newscaster showed footage from the beginning of her fight with Vilgax, including the shift from Jet Ray to Big Chill. Jen frowned. I thought Grandpa said Cooper made sure this was scrambled. She dove for her phone, thought better of it, and pulled her necklace out of her shirt, punching up Cooper on her communicator instead. A sharp ring interrupted the lecture on maintenance of the newly minted proto-tool. The professor, a Galvan female, looked up at Cooper, who blushed. Sorry. He checked his badge and grimaced. I need to take this. Sorry, Professor. He stepped out into the hallway. Jen, what's going on? How much of my fight with Vilgax didn't get scrambled? Cooper paused, not having expected that, but he shook his head.
It took some time to get into the frequency Siphon was using to broadcast it. I think I cut it off just as you turned into Humongosaur.
Jen sighed in relief. Sorry about that, Coop. I just ran across a newscast doing a piece about it. Cooper raised an eyebrow.
Really? Thought most people wrote it off as a hoax or a publicity stunt.
Jen shrugged. Apparently not William Harangue. She turned the volume on the TV up so Cooper could hear it over the communicator.
Who is this mysterious shapeshifter? And why did this alien challenge her directly? This is clearly some kind of alien grudge match that's chosen Earth as a boxing ring. While I, for one, will not stand for it. This Jen 10,
Jen winced. Her hero name was just a little too close to her real name,
is clearly a threat to society, who should turn herself into the proper authorities for bringing her alien fight to our doorstep.
Yeah, so that's going well. Cooper shook his head. Her rank isn't widely viewed, though. He's local Bellwood, isn't he? Jen pulled up a search on the reporter on her phone. Yeah, rich local Bellwood, but still local.
He'll probably get written off as a conspiracy nut. I wouldn't worry about it too much. No one saw your face. Listen, I have to get back to class. The professor is going to kill me.
Jen swore. I'm so sorry. It did not even cross my mind that's what you'd be doing right now. Please feel free to use me as an excuse. Cooper laughed.
I honestly might. You never told us you were famous.
Jen laughed. Well, I'm not, on Earth. Come on, how famous can I be at the Academy? I've never even been. Cooper rolled his eyes at his communicator. Jen, there's an elective about you. Well, you and Azimuth. But there's a literal class. The history of the Omnitrix. Jen laughed. That's hilarious. And exceedingly embarrassing, all at the same time. I wonder if they got all the drama right in the textbook. Oh, good God. There's a textbook out there in the universe that has my family drama down in black and white. I need a copy. Cooper laughed.
I'll talk to Alan. He's thinking about taking the class.
I have to go. I'll talk to you later. Jen bid him goodbye, still laughing. Cooper slipped back into the classroom and to the table where his partner was working on the proto-tool. The professor floated over to them on her movable platform. Is everything all right, Cadet Daniels? Cooper nodded.
Yeah, sorry about that, Professor Azix. My friend Jen needed tech support.
Azix raised an eyebrow. Gen 10. Cooper nodded. Very well, I'll excuse it this time. Continue your work. She looked over the adjustments Rook, Cooper's partner, had made and nodded. Very good, trainee Rook. The cat-like alien smiled at the praise as Cooper looked over the adjustments.
You made a new setting? What does it do?
Rook picked up the proto-tool and it morphed in his hands into a bow.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. On my home planet of Ravana, those trained in the old ways would sometimes go out hunting, usually for the larger birds that live on my planet, in the more forested areas. And you'd use a bow and arrow?
Cooper asked.
Yes, though generally the tips of the arrows are constructed from crystallized amber ogia, which, in such forms, causes a minor explosion at the end that ends the life of the bird quite humanely.
Cooper nodded slightly.
Neat. That amber ogia was used as a fuel, though. Oh, it is quite a versatile material.
Cooper nodded, and they went back to modifying the proto-tool. Chapter 36, Reflective. Jen had been quiet as they drove to their backup hangout spot, the Burger Shack. Mr. Smoothie was in ruins again. Jen was upset, worried that this time they wouldn't rebuild. Or at least that's what Ethan thought she was worried about. But as Gwen and Kevin, in a spare ID mask, went to grab some food, Jen turned to him. Do I really look that creepy? Ethan blinked. What? When the Omnitrix does the thing that... She sighed. I know that sometimes the Omnitrix makes it look like my eyes are pure green, with no white or pupil, just like that box thing. Do I really look that creepy when it happens? Ethan shook his head. No. Jen raised an eyebrow.
I haven't seen the green. I've seen the yellow after the accident.
Jen nodded. The yellow was the scanning setting. It had taken over when 6-6 had damaged the Omnitrix, causing several of the transformations to escape. Ethan paused.
The yellow was unnerving. I thought you were dying, and while your eyes were yellow, you didn't act like you. It was like the watch took over completely. When does it do the fully green?
Jen sighed. Well, according to Julie, it's happened twice. Once when Big Chill took over and, well, did some stuff. Ethan raised an eyebrow.
Is that what Kevin meant when he said Big Chill had babies?
Jen went bright red and looked relieved. When Kevin and Gwen showed back up, Kevin grinned.
Are we talking about your space kids?
Jen glared at him over her burger as Gwen giggled. Ironically, that was also Kevin and I's first date. Jen burst out laughing. Kevin joined in and Gwen giggled along. Ethan looked at them critically.
I can't decide if you guys are joking or not.
Jen shook her head, still bright red, though if it was from laughter or embarrassment was less clear. Sadly, no. I am in fact a teenage superhero and a mom to 14 bouncing baby moth aliens. Kevin howled with laughter, and Gwen covered her mouth to try and stifle her own.
14?
Ethan breathed out before shaking his head.
How come I haven't met them?
Or their father, for that matter. Kevin was still laughing, but Gwen seemed to have taken pity on her bright red cousin. They're in space. Necrophrygians reproduce asexually once every 80 or so years. Big Chill took over because the eggs are very vulnerable, and there were no other Necrophrygians around to help protect the nest. Jen nodded. I also ate about a metric ton of metal as Big Chill.
Yeah, and a ton of pickles when you were you.
Jen threw a chili-covered fry at Kevin. Ethan snorted slightly as the fry hit Kevin in the cheek. But the second time was when Azimuth gave me master control, but it only happened in my right eye. And I guess it's not pure green, it's the Omnitrix symbol in my eye. Gwen shook her head. Then there was when you were curing the DNA aliens. Pure green, totally unresponsive. Jen frowned. But I was in the Omnitrix at the time. That shouldn't count. Ethan frowned.
You can go in the Omnitrix?
Under the right circumstances, yeah. That's what happened when Chromostone shattered. Gwen frowned. It was weird that Jen could talk so easily about that. She still couldn't talk about what had happened to Feedback. Kevin was the one who spoke, though, Gwen still figuring out how to phrase it delicately.
Yeah, what happened to Chromostone anyway?
Jen frowned down at the watch. I don't know for sure. The Omnitrix said that it's temporarily unstable, but I have no idea what that means. She ran a finger over the dial. It doesn't feel like Chromostone is gone, but I just can't use it right now. Like I know Accelerate is still in there, I just can't get to her. Gwen nodded. I guess that makes sense. Ethan nodded.
So to answer your original question, no, you're not creepy.
Ethan said with conviction, taking Jen's hand. Even with the moth kids?
Even with the moth kids, though you could have told me about them sooner, you know.
Jen rolled her eyes. They don't tend to come up in conversation. Not a lot of people know about them. Grandpa Max wants to keep it that way. Kevin frowned.
Why?
Jen shrugged. Think about it. How easy would it be to use kids against me, especially when they're my kids? I have way too many enemies who have proven they're willing to use people I care about against me. You did it once with Gwen, she said, gesturing at Kevin with a fry. Kevin frowned at his burger as Ethan blinked and Gwen shook her head at her cousin.
Wait, Kevin was a bad guy? I think I remember you saying something about him trying to kill you, but I thought you were kidding.
Jen shook her head. It was years ago. He's changed. For the better. Just the first person to come to mind. Ghost Freak did it too. Again with Gwen. Crab did it with Gwen and Grandpa. It's happened a lot, but most of the people I care about can take care of themselves. But kids? No way. Ethan nodded and wrapped an arm around her.
Hey, they'll be okay, right?
Jen nodded. I had Azimuth look in on them while we were bouncing around the universe for a week. They're so much bigger than I thought they would be by now. Like, they look halfway to full grown. Still cute, though. Gwen smiled. She hadn't known that Jen had done that, but it in no way surprised her. Her cousin got attached fast, and though she remembered nothing about the hatching of Big Chill's kids, she did remember the smallest one, and Gwen sometimes caught her staring up into space like she was expecting something to happen. Though, with their lives, that was a possibility.